Chapter 65. End the Deadlock. Watermaster battles Demon Xuan. And we do have a content warning for graphic depictions of violence, so just keep that in mind. Mingyi's voice came from behind. What are you grumbling about all alone? Shi Jingxuan's body stiffened. I... Shilian wanted to help him respond, but Shi Jingxuan's tongue was refusing his control. It couldn't be helped. His most trusted, beloved friend had turned out to be the one he feared most, hiding right beside him all this time. Now that there was no one around to help, there was no telling what he planned to do. Who wouldn't be scared? Suddenly, Mingyi's fingers dug in. Pain flared in Shi Jingxuan's shoulder as he was pushed to the ground. At the same time, a ghastly pale white hand plunged from the creek and groped the empty space that Shi Jingxuan's neck had occupied just moments before. A water ghost. The hand attack missed thanks to Mingyi's timely push, and Mingyi parried with a palm blast. Screams came from beneath the water. Whatever creature lurked beneath was probably obliterated by the strike. Shi Jingxuan still lay sprawled on the ground where he'd been shoved, and Mingyi pulled him up. What were you thinking? Using some random water in the Blackwater Demon Lair to wash your face? Shi Jingxuan had just washed his face with the water of a creek that was contaminated with the putrefying corpses of water ghosts. He should have felt disgusted, but he had no mind right now to notice such details. His face and hair were still dripping wet. He was as drenched as a drowned dog, and looked equally as lost and forlorn. Mind completely blank, he let Mingyi pull him up, and followed along behind him. Truthfully, everything about Mingxiong had always smelled a bit fishy if he thought about it. He was the Earthmaster, so he drew every teleportation array waypoint along the journey. The technique should have been his specialty, but he ran into problems at every juncture. The four of them were inexplicably sent from Puchi Shrine to the town of Fugu, and then, when it came to transport the wind and water masters from Blackwater Island, there was another hiccup. Was it because the transportation chamber was in disrepair? Was it something else causing ghostly mischief? Was the mastermind omnipotent? Why overthink the issue? The simplest answer was the most likely. Mingyi had been meddling all along. When the Windmaster was taken away by the Reverend of Empty Words, it was Mingyi who had allowed it by losing sight of him. He'd also been the one to discover the Windmaster after he had been robbed of his powers. He had always stayed by Shi Jingxuan's side, and knew his fears and tendencies like the back of his hand, and he was certainly close enough to the Windmaster to know his verbal password. Wielding his command of the Reverend of Empty Words, he was also the one who coerced Shi Jingxuan into opening the doors to the protection array at the Terrace of Cascading Wine. At the Temple of Wind and Water, he cracked that establishment plaque with his own hands without a hint of remorse. Perhaps it was a necessary evil. Or perhaps it was an entirely purposeful one. What audacious arrogance to openly dismantle his enemy's establishment plaque with such a chivalrous excuse. And his enemy had to be grateful for it. It wasn't like Shilian hadn't been suspicious at times with so many odd little coincidences. He'd tried to probe by asking those 3 questions, but he never imagined that something this inconceivable, this audacious could happen. That a ghost king had impersonated a heavenly official and hidden among them for so long. Ship-sinking Blackwater kept a low profile. Of course he did, since a low profile was a necessity for someone existing under a different identity for so many years. Mingyi had devoured the Reverend of Empty Words, and its powers were devoured along with it. He was able to command it as his minion, and wield its might as his own. His responses to Shilian's 3 questions were flawless because a Supreme Ghost King would hardly be burdened by the unique quirks of a minion species. If he wanted to speak the truth, then he could speak the truth. If he wanted to deceive, he could lie as he willed. And then there was that skeleton. Its dexterous hands and feet matched the expected physique of the Earthmaster. Why worship it in the Netherwater manner? Because those were the remains of a heavenly official. If they weren't treated with solemn respect and were buried carelessly, the bones wouldn't rest in peace. No coffin would hold, and so he was forced to worship it within the grand ceremony within his own halls. With all that said, there was something else that tipped Shilian off to his real identity. It was the skeleton's lunge. The Watermaster had asked why the skeleton would experience terminal lucidity, and Mingyi quickly tried to brush it off by claiming it was reacting to his flippant statement, as long as it's not in our way, it doesn't matter who it was. But that wasn't what had provoked the real Mingyi at all. It was the part that came after. Lord Earthmaster. He was the real Earthmaster, and his impersonator was standing right before him, deliberately and nonchalantly leading the rest of them astray. He hadn't only meddled all this time. To escape suspicion, Mingyi would sometimes do just the opposite, and nudge them back on the right track. He once said to Hucheng, "You really do have spies in the heavens," as if he wasn't that very spy. That, of course, also explained Huacheng's sarcastic response. "Don't you already know that?" He'd been mocking this game of pretend. However, the word spy was probably inaccurate. It was more likely an agreement between those two, specifically an agreement about the exchange of information. The two Supreme Ghost Kings cooperated for their mutual benefit. Wasn't that a win-win? Blackwater infiltrated the upper court and observed all movement in the heavenly realm, big and small. Hua Cheng took root in the mortal realm, increasing the number of worshippers. It remained to be seen whether they cooperated in other matters. When Junwu sent the Earthmaster to infiltrate Ghost City, it was no different from attempting to flood the ocean of the Temple of the Dragon King, or sending thieves to raid a bandit's lair. Completely futile. It seemed that only two major accidents occurred while he was undercover. The first was that ascending fire dragon spell. An imposter obviously wouldn't instigate such a pointless charade. Shilian was more inclined to think that the real Mingyi had cast the ascending fire dragon spell during a botched escape attempt. In order to sneak into the upper court in the guise of a total stranger, one must have a thorough understanding of the person being impersonated. Therefore, the impersonated individual must be kept alive to pry out details as they become relevant over the years. Information about their life experience, their skills, their method of manipulating their spiritual device, and so on. The fake Mingyi likely kidnapped and impersonated the real Mingyi right after he passed his heavenly tribulation, but before his ascension. An imposter would have been easily detected if the real Mingyi had already known other heavenly officials. The escape and the subsequent spell were accidents, which was why when Hua Cheng received the news, he had to leave to help his collaborator clean up the mess. And right at that time, Shilian received the Ghost City rescue mission from Junwu. Well, he hadn't thought so at the time. In hindsight, he realized that the operation had gone a little too smoothly. Shilian rescued the Earthmaster from the dungeons of Paradise Manor. But how did he discover said dungeon? He had spotted a cursed shackle on the wrist of Hua Cheng's ghost masked subordinate, and then saw him sneaking around Paradise Manor. A cursed shackle was a mark of humiliation. When heavenly officials were banished, they would normally hide their shackles from the eyes of others. But the ghost masked man wore it openly on his wrist. Why did he hide it again on Shilian's subsequent Ghost City visits? If it wasn't simple carelessness, the only other explanation was that it was done intentionally to grab Shilian's attention and lead him to the imprisoned fake Earthmaster. The real Mingyi, the one who'd really set off the distress signal, was likely killed after that. It was impossible to completely destroy his remains and remove all evidence, but keeping the flesh intact would be too great a risk to the masquerade, so it was dissolved until he was nothing but white bones. The second accident was Shi Chengxuan seeking Shilian's help after getting spooked by the Reverend of Empty Words. It was obvious that Hua Cheng didn't want Shilian to be pulled into this affair, which was why Ming Yi declared at Puqi Shrine that coming here was not my will. While they searched for Shi Chengxuan at the Terrace of Cascading Wine, Hua Cheng likely left to rendezvous with Ming Yi and demand an explanation for what was happening. Shilian had no opening to explain any of this to Shi Chengxuan, but Shi Chengxuan was clearly thinking through each detail on his own. The hands hidden within his sleeves trembled non-stop. As the two walked side by side, Shilian's mind was churning. Where in the world had Shiwuru gone? Shiwuru was the first to leave via the array, and Ming Yi was last. He shouldn't have been able to jump over Shi Chengxuan to do anything to Shiwuru, which meant there were three possibilities. First, Shiwuru was sent elsewhere. Second, something was waiting wherever Shiwuru had been sent, and he had become its victim. Third, Shiwuru left on his own. If it were the first or second possibility, there was no reason for Ming Yi to keep up this act of searching for Shiwuru in front of Shi Chengxuan. Having thought that far, Shilian heard Ming Yi ask, "Where's your golden pendant?" Shi Chengxuan still hadn't recovered, but Shilian was filled with dread. Ming Yi had to ask the question a few times before Shi Chengxuan managed to, Didn't you say that you and your brother used your golden essences to forge those longevity locks? Ming Yi said gruffly. And that they'll cry out if their masters are hurt. Shi Chengxuan told Ming Yi everything, so he of course also knew how this particular spiritual device worked, which meant he was going to use the golden pendant to find Shiwuru. But my scratch is healed, Shi Chengxuan objected. That's easy to solve, Ming Yi said coldly, raising his hand. Is he going to hurt Lord Windmaster? Shilian tensed, ready to go on the defensive. But unexpectedly Ming Yi squeezed the clotted over gash on his own arm. It began to ooze blood again. Give me the pendant, I'll wear it, he said. Shilian couldn't help but be awed at the scene playing out before him. Even if this was an act, his ability to take it this far was astounding. He now understood why Shi Chengxuan thought so highly of Ming Yi. Someone like this would truly be worth befriending, if not for the malicious, murderous intent lurking beneath the surface. Shi Chengxuan was still hesitant, too scared to move. The moment he handed over the longevity lock, the two golden necklaces would cry out for each other. Shiwuru would surely come find him when he noticed. Ming Yi furrowed his brow. Are you scared stupid? No, Shi Chengxuan said. Actually, this lock, did I never tell you? It only works if I'm the one wearing it. Ming Yi looked doubtful. Really? Shi Chengxuan clutched his longevity lock with a death grip and gave a hard nod. That's right. Ming-Yi stared at him for a moment, but ultimately seemed to abandon the idea. He glanced at the reopened gash on his own arm and didn't say another word. Just then, the longevity lock around Qi Qingxuan's neck started vibrating. Color drained from Qi Qingxuan's face. Ming-Yi reacted immediately and started moving in the direction the longevity lock pointed. Lord Watermaster is over there. The golden lock's resonance meant that Shiwudu was wounded. He'd been perfectly well when they entered the array. So what had hurt him since then? Shilian could sense that Shi Qingxuan was torn. He was anxious to go, but at the same time very reluctant to do so. They were trapped in Blackwater Lake's illusion, and there was no one else on the island who could help. Pei Ming was building a coffin boat outside the illusion, and waiting for their return, and Shi Qingxuan was currently mortal. If Shiwudu was injured, they'd have nowhere to turn for help. How could they possibly escape if they delivered themselves right to the master's doorstep? They hurried to follow in the lock's wake. Shi Qingxuan tried speaking up. Ming Xiong, I think it's a trap. It's probably best not to go. What trap? Ming-Yi asked. To answer him, Shi Qingxuan spun a bold-faced lie. How could my brother possibly get hurt? It can't be him over there. Unfortunately, unlike Shi Qingxuan, Ming-Yi still had a firm hold on logic. We're in a Supreme Ghost King's territory. Lord Watermaster might not have what it takes to protect himself. Let's go there and take a look first. Shi Qingxuan couldn't think of a reason not to go, and Shilian was equally stumped. He watched in silence, planning to play it by ear. They followed the longevity lock, using its vibration as a guide to grow closer and closer to their target, until finally they found Shiwudu curled in on himself on the ground. He was holding his stomach, and he looked distressed and in immense pain. Aga! Shi Qingxuan cried. He rushed over with Ming-Yi trailing close behind. However, when they approached Shiwudu, the prone figure leapt to his feet, and erupted into maniacal laughter as he pulled Shi Qingxuan into a hug. Shi Qingxuan was utterly bewildered as he stood enveloped in those arms, and he only belatedly realized how twisted the man's face was. This wasn't Shiwudu. It was only a madman dressed in his robes, and wearing his golden lock pendant. Shi Qingxuan hadn't even opened his mouth to speak when Ming-Yi abruptly collapsed next to him. His chest now had a hole in it the size of a fist, and his blood spilled upon the ground. A figure in white leapt from a tree, grabbed Shi Qingxuan, and dragged him along as he fled. Run! Upon closer inspection, Shilian saw that it was the real Shiwudu. Aga! Shi Qingxuan exclaimed. Don't talk, just come with me, he's no good! Shiwudu ordered in a hushed, urgent voice. In a flash, Shilian understood what had happened. As it turned out, Shiwudu wasn't one to be underestimated. He knew something was off the moment he walked out of the transportation array's chamber, and saw he was still in the Netherwater Manor. Shiwudu didn't overthink things like Shilian, and he was much sharper. He immediately suspected Ming-Yi, so he hid in the shadows to watch and determine what he was up to. He and Shi Qingxuan were probably sent to different locations. Otherwise, he would have brought Shi Qingxuan along to hide. After spotting Ming-Yi and Shi Qingxuan together, Shiwudu had seized a madman and dressed him in his outer robes and golden lock pendant, then hit him with a blast to wound him. It was all bait to lure in Ming-Yi and distract him from the ambush he had planned. It was a ruthless move. There wasn't any solid proof that Ming-Yi had actually tampered with anything, but Shiwudu had still shot to kill. Shi Qingxuan couldn't help but look back. When he did, he saw Ming-Yi lying still as a corpse. And then he sat up. The blast had pierced right through his heart. He stoically looked down to stare at the gory hole, then slowly rose to his feet. Shi Qingxuan's blood ran cold, and Shilian could feel it in his own heart. Even a heavenly official shouldn't be able to move so easily after having been wounded this severely. He had to be something inhuman. As the two brothers continued their flight, suddenly the hairs on the back of Shilian's neck stood all at once. Watch out! He shouted. He yanked the Watermaster. A sharp noise whistled by, leaving a chilling light in its wake. The Watermaster would have lost his head if not for Shilian's tug. Those invisible creatures from the water's reflection had returned. Shiwudu cursed. Then he flipped the Watermaster fan open backward and swung. Several long, thin water arrows shot from the waves painted on the surface of his fan, and they encircled their bodies to form a protective shield. The invisible creatures couldn't do anything to breach the barrier, and the two brothers continued to run. Shi Qingxuan couldn't help but look back again. This time, he could feel his hair stand on end. He's catching up! Sure enough, Ming-Yi was about 70 meters behind, following them at a heavy, dolorous pace. Although his steps appeared slow, the distance between him and the two brothers grew significantly shorter with each one he took. It looked as though, in just a few more steps, he'd be able to touch the hems of their robes. Shiwudu never looked back. With another swing of his fan, 20 or 30 more dragon-shaped water arrows shot forth. With one more swing, their numbers doubled. He fluttered the fan rapidly, and the hundreds of razor-sharp water arrows hurtled toward Ming-Yi and barraged him from all sides. Though they were made of water, they slashed through the air like steel blades. If he took a single misstep, his body would be riddled with holes. And yet Ming-Yi caught the very first water arrow with his bare hands. He yanked it like it was the end of a rope, and with that motion, the water master fin was snatched from Shiwuru's hand. The water dragon arrows dancing wildly in the skies dissolved the moment the fan left his hand, and a weak drizzle rained upon them. Shiwuru abruptly stopped in his tracks and looked at his hand in disbelief. Over his centuries-long tenure, no one had ever been able to seize the water master fan from his hand. He now knew he couldn't escape, and finally looked back. Ming-Yi was still stalking steadily toward them, with his hands clasped behind his back. He was going through an intricate full-body transformation. With every step, a change occurred. His already blanched face became even paler, until it resembled Huacheng's bloodless translucence. His forehead grew sharper, his brows deeper, and these shifts made him appear even more somber. Upon his black robes, subtle patterns of waves appeared on the once unremarkable corners of the hems, woven with thin threads and shimmering with a mysterious silver glow. By the time he arrived before the Wind and Water Masters, although his face was mostly the same, he was clearly a completely different person. The Earth Master wasn't a martial god, so he had no talent for martial arts and his spiritual power were only average. However, neither of these points applied to the one before them now. "What exactly are you?" Shiwuru cautiously demanded. Ming-Yi seemed to find the question funny. He squinted in amusement. "You're standing in my territory, yet you still need to ask." "Black water demon Xuan," Shiwuru ventured. Ming-Yi turned his gaze to Shi-Ching-Xuan, but Shi-Ching-Xuan didn't react. "You've always been the Earthmaster." Or, Shiwuru trailed off and seemed to come to a conclusion similar to Shi Lian's. "I see." But he had only realized that Blackwater Demon Xuan had infiltrated the heavens. "You and I have always minded our business. Well, water doesn't interfere with that of rivers, and we've likewise ruled over our own domains," Shiwuru said. "It was not my intent to intrude in your territory, so why don't we both take a step back?" Well, Water Tyrant, it seems there are times you dare not to be tyrannical," Ming-Yi mused aloud. Shiwuru was proud by nature, and displeasure flashed across his face at this comment. Since they were both under someone else's roof, and his younger brother was by his side, he had to lower his head. But he still wasn't willing to back down.